welcome you guys back. We're doing our final YouTube video for the season 2023. It's April, and as you'll see when we pull this outside, we've still got a ton of snow up here in Ironwood. We're at the ABR Ski Trails. My name's Eric Anderson, I'm the owner. This is my cohort, Rick Slade. He's been working with us for many years. Very experienced groomer and mechanic. So we had this Titan we just picked up in February. It was actually the first one in the area. I'm not real familiar with the Polaris, but this is the first 4-stroke that they came out with. So the Titan's been out for a while. We've tested one a few years ago. None of our older staff likes the 2-stroke smell and noise, so we waited it out, and we have the first 4-stroke here. It's the most I've ever paid for a snowmobile. It was $17,100. We still don't have the $1,000 winch on it, and we had to add a bigger windshield for $100 and some and do our tweaks to it, but it's a pricey little machine. Our initial reaction is it's pretty close with the Skidoo Expedition SE. Rick and I were just talking. It cools really well. It cools better than the Skidoo, but there's some other things we're still testing. So let me turn it over to Rick to talk about some of the technical features of the machine and what Rick has done to it to make it work for grooming.
Okay, so far we've taken advantage of the adjustments that it's got, which is suspension adjustments primarily. This one comes with a fairly expensive shock package. It's got the Fox 3-position adjusting under damping on the shocks. So we set all those to full firm to limit our weight transfer, limit the movement for better steering, which is always what we're shooting for. We raised our spring preload, which has got a threaded adjuster on the front shocks, got that all the way to the maximum, once again for ski pressure. And then we changed the carbides out to what has basically become our standard, which is the Stud Boy shaper bars.
Yeah, we probably should make note of the number, because this being a new sled, took 2 tries. Dennis Kirk has been very helpful in helping us. But this part number is, it's a Stud Boy Dennis Kirk number 032115.
So we're expecting a little improvement in the steering from those. Then with the rear suspension, pretty much the same setup. We raised our spring preload up to the maximum on the rear springs. Of course, we installed scratchers for low snow conditions. Set our shock damping to full firm, and then front limiter strap, which controls ski pressure basically. They only had one adjustment on it, so we drilled another hole in the strap and pulled it up 1.5 inches from what the stock adjustment is. Once again, to put more weight on the front end basically for steering. The only other thing we had to do to it, it didn't come with the high protective windshield like most utility sleds do, so we had to buy that extra. But yeah, that about covers it for the adjustments that were available. And then
was there a 2-up seat on here?
yes, it does come standard with a 2-up seat.
Okay.
But that's easily removable, just the latch.
And the cargo box, was this an option or standard?
That came standard on this one too. So, and it's a usable size cargo box, so we can get one of our smaller saws in there. So we're using the stock box on this one. It comes with a pintle style hitch also, which is what we use. It's a little different from ours, but so far it's worked. So we'll see how that goes. We haven't studded the track yet, but we plan to. Just we haven't had the time. It's a pretty deep lug track, about comparable to the one that's on the Skidoo. It's I don't know if they rate this at 1.5 inches or a little bit higher. So you got to get some pretty long studs to make them work. But
What I've got here, Rick, is what you had me order. It's the Grand Master from Woody.
Yeah.
It's a 1.575, 5/16 aluminum nut stud. And they measure 1.95 overall.
Okay.
That gives us a little bit outside of the lug.
Yeah, that should get us pretty close to a 1/4 inch over the lug, so that'll get us some grip. And we found that studding them kind of like a mild trail sled with 2 in each panel on the track works pretty good. We tried going with less than that, and we found you get a better benefit with 2 on each panel, and it doesn't affect the steering. It doesn't make it any harder to turn. So that's the way we're going on this one.
How have you felt that the gearing is? I noticed this has the 2-speed, not the 3-speed like the Bearcat, but it's a 2-speed like the Skidoo.
Yeah.
Has the gear ratio felt about the same to you?
It seems like the low range may not be quite as low as the Skidoo. It's a little hard to tell because with the 2-cylinder engine, you got a different sound. So it sounds like it's struggling more at the low end, but it seems to work just fine. So without actually seeing the numbers, I don't know what the exact ratio is on these. Feels like it's not quite as low, but it looks like when we hooked it to things, it's going to be low enough that it won't be a problem, and it's not going to affect belt life or anything. So it's just a matter of feel, like I said, because it sounds different. And speaking of sound, it's nice and quiet. The sound, overall sound level is pretty comparable to the Skidoo, which is one of the quieter sleds made. The Arctic Cat Bearcats, which are still our comparison point for everything, are louder. They run more RPM and their exhaust is louder. So
I fire this one up and listen to it.
You can do that.
Fuel injected.
Yep, fuel injected.
How does the Skidoo sound?
Fire that too. Yeah, the difference between the 2-cylinder and the 3-cylinder, the Skidoo sounds smoother. This has got more distinct power pulses, so it changes the sound, but the overall level is very similar. Vibration, even with the 2-cylinder, it's got a balance shaft in it, and it's barely noticeable. At some RPMs, you feel a little bit of vibration in your feet, but it's not anything that's going to bother anybody. We've used it for dragging, and a couple of us have driven it for a couple hours at a time, and there's never been any issue there. So far so good. Okay, from this end we got a few other features that we didn't mention yet. It does come with a nice set of mirrors standard, which are pretty useful. Actually more useful than the Skidoo ones, for a groomer's point of view. Comes with the standard Polaris, electronic digital dash or something they call it, which the good feature about that for us is you can run the engine temperature up on it, and it tells it in a digital readout format, so you know exactly where you're at there on the engine temperature. The handlebars and ergonomics and whatnot are pretty much similar to the Skidoo, really. They're not well, the bars are adjustable for angle if you want, but you got to use wrenches. It's not quick and easy, but we got it set up pretty good. Hand warmers are very hot. They're only high, low, and off, and even on low they're pretty warm. But that's the switches right here. It's easy to adjust. They give you a little bit of storage compartment up here on the dash, enough to carry spare fuses and maybe a spare pair of gloves. So it's something. And let's see. The shifting is mechanical on these. This is a shift lever. It's in low range right now. It's got neutral, pulled it all the way down for reverse, and all the way forward is high range, which you're probably never going to use when you're grooming. It does come with a tether switch for the people that are paranoid or safety conscious. Tether switch means simply you hook this to your body, and if this gets pulled off the switch, it kills the engine, so the sled can't run away from you or whatever.
How is the capacity of the fuel tank?
This is, I believe, 13 gallons. So
wow.
It's almost as much as the Arctic Cat. The Arctic Cats are 14, the Skidoos are only 11 or 12. So plenty of fuel capacity. From what we've seen so far, it's basically in the 90 horsepower class, which is similar to what the 900 Ace is on the Skidoo. And the fuel consumption seems like it's just as low, maybe even better than the Skidoo. So that's very good. Very low fuel consumption on it. So that part's been working real well for us too. Like I said, you can see it comes with the pintle style hitch, which is locked down by this pin. It's an easy one to hook up because the bottom part of the hook only comes up halfway. We don't know yet if it's going to be a strength issue on it, but it doesn't seem like it will be. So. Of course, the wiring on it we put on for our setup for the grooming implements. And then we get into the rear suspension, I guess, which in stock form is too soft, and it allows the rear to compress and the skis to lift, and then you can't steer. Polaris does not list a heavier duty rear spring for this machine, at least not at this time. They believe that this one will cover any intended use, which kind of shows us they've never used it the way we do. When the Titan came out, they did show it pulling sleds, even a sled full of gas cans, so they claimed it was like 800 and some pounds, but it was in an otter sled, which all you got to do is break it loose and there's no sustained load on it, whereas when you're pulling grooming implements like we are, especially with the knives down, you can have a sustained load of 600 to 900 pounds depending on how hard the snow is. So that's what makes our life difficult, and that's what pulls so hard on rear suspensions.
You know, Rick, they really should have a better capacity for pulling. You know, just like you say, they tell you what it can pull, but you know, with the coefficient of friction in a sled, 900 pounds in a sled is that's only probably 100 pounds of drawbar force.
Exactly. And
as you know, we've tested these up to 900 pounds pulling a 9-foot groomer with the teeth down.
Yep.
So it'd be good if the manufacturers could realize that and give us a spec for people when they do buy a utility sled.
Yes, it would. Unfortunately, we're such a small market that sometimes we get ignored.
We do.
So then we improvise, which leads us to the rear suspension. Without getting into, or without having any firmer springs, what we're trying to do with what we did is we're basically restricting the suspension travel mechanically. What we did is we put in another crossbar between the rails, and we're using the Polaris limiter straps adjusted to a different length to prevent the rear scissor arm from compressing. When that scissor arm can't move or compress, as you can see with Eric jumping on it, the suspension is not going down. So as long as our limiter straps prove to be tough enough to take that load, we should be okay with that setup, pulling a groomer, and it should steer.
So was that a stock Polaris cross shaft that you have on there?
That's what we started with. We used the cross shaft, that's the rear one on the suspension, and that was an aluminum shaft and it wasn't strong enough. So we had a local machine shop here build us a steel one that works a lot better.
And I see you have two limiter straps. Are those the limiter straps similar to the front, or is that the limiter strap similar to the back?
It's the one that's specified for the rear, because this suspension design uses a rear limiter strap to prevent it from extending too far. Well, what we're trying to do is to prevent it from compressing, so it's set in there differently, but it's the same strap as the rear of this suspension uses. Yeah, it's a little pricey buying the Polaris parts, but it was the easy way to go, and it looks like it's going to work for us. So that's what we've done to it so far.
All right, so this is the Skidoo, and I just want to compare the difference between the two. I showed you the flex on the Polaris earlier. I'm going to do the same test right now. So here's my 200 pounds. And then if I just kneel on it, you do see it flexes. And I can do that same test again on the Polaris. The Polaris does feel tighter. So here's pushing down, kneeling on the back end. Yeah, noticeably this does seem stiffer, so I think you're going to be surprised when we hook this onto a groomer. All right, just as a kind of a refresher, as you know, we keep the sleds, we're always testing new sleds, keeping our fleet fresh. This sled is the Skidoo Expedition SE. I can't emphasize that enough. SE, not LE. SE stands for Special Edition. More importantly, like we talked about in the last two videos, SE has not only the winch, although I think the winch is an option on this year, so you have to pay extra for the winch and front bumper, but it does have the ability to put a winch on, and most importantly, it has the air shock. And right now, I have it set on 5, that's how we groom. But basically, this 2023 Expedition, we spring checked it. That's the only way to get them. Spring checking means you send your $500 deposit by April 1st or so, and then in the fall you get your snowmobile. Well, with things like they are, we didn't get this sled until, I believe, January. But we had our 2020 that we did the video on. That was the red one. And basically there's no change on the 2023 900 Ace SE other than the color. This one's black, the other was red. And they've added a little texture to the seat, which is not really important for us. So the sled works the same. Temperature runs on the hot side. Skidoo seems like they have done that intentionally. I believe up in the 205, 210 degree range. And we'll compare that to the Polaris, which I remember Rick talking about that running at 185 degrees all day long on ice, on powder, 40 degrees ambient. So, but anyway, this is just a look at the new 2023 Expedition. We'll be continuing to groom with these as well as the Titan, and then our fleet of Bearcats. Locked up solid at 4. We normally would never groom with 2 people, but wanted to show you with an extra person on the back and a 6-foot groomer. Actually, it's an 8-foot if you count the wings. The back end does not flex at all. Now I'll add my 200 pounds. Maybe getting a half an inch or so, Rick?
If that, yeah. She's holding it, so.
But
as long as
we were pulling full knives. You know, the snow isn't real crusty, but still, that's a lot of tongue weight. You know, it's got to be a couple hundred pounds or more of tongue weight plus Rick. The sled had good ski pressure and steered well. I noticed the temperature was 175 the whole time, and what is it, 50 degrees out?
Yeah. close.
So that's pretty impressive. I think this Polaris Titan is going to give the Skidoo Expedition a good run for its money. Do you have any concerns about the machine or the longevity of this 4-stroke 2-cylinder?
No problem there. The engine is basically a similar design to what Polaris has been putting in their side-by-sides for as long as they've been making their side-by-sides. So they're very experienced with building their own 4-strokes and building them to stand up to rough conditions, because side-by-sides get abused in the mud and the water and everywhere else, and even out in the desert. So that's probably where they learned how to cool these things, because they're sold nationwide, of course.
Yeah, I mean 175 degrees in this ambient temperature, that's pretty impressive. As you can see, looking down at Rick, he's got great ski pressure. He's getting in some real tight turns. And keep in mind, that's a 6-foot TID behind him, 8 foot with the wings. And he's got full teeth. Well, looks like Rick's running out of snow. That's southern exposed, 100%. That normally goes fast. I expect that in late March some years, but it's the end of April, and to expect a little bare spot right here, I'm not surprised.
So,
well, we'll keep you posted as we find out more. We've kind of run out of time. It's April 24th or 25th already, and we've got a couple bare spots, as you can see, but otherwise we've got about a foot of base. But our testing and our snowmobiling and our grooming is pretty much nearing an end for the year. We've got the 4 Skidoos and the 4 Articats summarized, serviced, and put away, and we'll be putting the Polaris away here in the next couple days. Thanks for watching, and stay in tune.